Hey. Oh, I see two Sankirtanas.
Oh, I wonder if that's my sister because I sent her the Zoom link.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think she should be able to rename.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, it has you named as me probably because I shared the Zoom link with you.
Oh, okay.
But
Let's see
you
if I
should
can.
be able to rename yourself.
Yeah.
Is that going to cause any problems with like audio or anything, Araceli?
What was that?
Is that going to cause any problems with like audio or anything if we're using the same Zoom link?
I don't think so.
You want me to click on the other one that you sent?
If you click on that one, it'll show up as your
Okay.
name. But I guess we could do that just to be safe.
Let me
Yeah.
leave and then rejoin.
Okay.
I always forget that it like when you register, the link is like unique to you.
I think except for webinars, anyone can join.
Yeah.
There we go. I see her.
Okay.
And I'm going to make her a co-host. I can make both of you co-hosts. Oh, and it's already.
And why this can harm both individual and collective health and wellness. Through authentic and open dialogue, Dr. Bowers will explore how this may be impacting us and it points to the need for crucial conversations as a strategy to mitigate the effects of imposter syndrome. And she will speak to the need of diversity, inclusion, and organizational equity as key players in this pursuit of eliminating the power that imposter syndrome has in our lives, especially now in our COVID lives. Dr. Bowers serves as the Vice Chair for Health Equity and an Assistant Professor of Clinical Internal Medicine, Division of Dermatology at the SIU School of Medicine. And I want to give her a very, very warm welcome. Welcome, Dr. Bowers, and thank you for taking the time with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's truly, truly an honor to be talking to you and to be invited for this audience of all amazingly high achievers. And it's also has a special place in my heart to be able to collaborate on a project with my sister. Our worlds have intersected in somewhat indirect ways over the years, but this is a direct collaboration, and I think that's just so cool. So thanks to her for really spearheading all of this, and your team members, Araceli and Samantha and Ivy and all of those who've interacted with me to try to help make this possible. So thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Simon, for giving me the platform. I really appreciate it. So, okay, well, I'm going to see if if technology works today. I'll be sharing my screen with my presentation, but at a couple of points, I'll be switching my screen share to a poll. So hopefully there may be just a little bit of a transition period when I switch screens back and forth. So I just ask for your patience as I do that. But let me go ahead and share my presentation. Okay. And I trust that you can all see my title slide.
I see it.
All right. So I am very, very pleased to be talking about imposter syndrome today. And you'll notice the title is different. And I will tell you that titles are always something that stress me out because I think they're so important to setting the tone for what the talk is going to be about and really getting to the key message. And so you'll notice the title is a little bit different than what it was in the flyer, but I think that this is a really important part about talking about imposter syndrome is that we've got to get real about it, and we've got to get real about these feelings that are making us feel fake. So I have no disclosures or conflicts of interest. And today I want us to have a conversation about imposter syndrome and categorize it a little bit better. How does it affect us? Why does this happen? And then lastly, round up with some things that we can do to address it. Granted, imposter syndrome is the intersection of a lot of different fields. It's the intersection of well-being, it's the intersection of equity, it's the intersection of organizational culture, and intrapersonal and interpersonal culture. So there's a lot of different fields represented, and obviously we can't go into deep depth about all of these things as much as I would love to, but I think we'll get a good overview of how this affects us. So why am I talking to you all about this today? Because if you try to Google me or do a search for imposter syndrome in my publications, you're not going to find anything. I'm not the scholarly expert on imposter syndrome by any means, but I'm speaking to you about it because I know it very well, near and dear to my heart. It's something that I struggle with. And I want to start by sharing with you obstacles, setbacks, failures, call them what you will, that I've experienced along the way. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of all the barriers I've been through, but I think these are the things that really stand out to me. After college, I applied for medical school and I was waitlisted. I almost didn't get into medical school. And once I did go into medical school, I was successful, but of course, I had a variety of um, of experiences throughout medical school that made me question my worth or my abilities, such as maybe not getting selected for certain honors or awards. Once I decided to apply for dermatology residency and I made the leap, I actually did not match for dermatology residency my first attempt. And it's ironic that I'm giving this talk this week because I don't know if you've heard, this is match week. And this is the week that medical students across the country find out whether or not they matched into the field of their choice. Yesterday, they found out if they matched or not. And then cruelly, they're made to wait several days and they find out where they are going on Friday. So I remember that week very well, finding out that I didn't match on that Monday. And I think that experience will always stay with me. Fast forward to my first job after dermatology residency out in Seattle. And I experienced a lot of things in that job, but one of the things that really stands out to me was a comment that was made for me by a high ranking administrator that maybe I wasn't cut out to be a physician. And I had a lot of pushback about my performance in terms of my productivity and what was expected out of me versus what I felt was appropriate. And ultimately, I was let go. And it's as much as it was a painful experience at the time, it really taught me a lot about how to overcome and move past these setbacks and then talk about them ultimately. And then, I've given several talks over the years, and I'm still someone who learns from every single talk. But I will never forget my first national talk at the American Academy of Dermatology that I absolutely bombed, ran out of time, fast forwarded, and just in so many ways botched. And I think of that experience as, again, something that was so hard in the moment, but since then I've been able to reflect on and learn from. But all of these experiences are things that I think traditionally would fall under the bucket of either failures or setbacks, right? But here's the thing is, right now, who am I? I am a board certified dermatologist. I'm an assistant professor at SIU School of Medicine. I am our dermatology residency program director. I hold a position as vice chair of health equity for our department. And of course, now I'm becoming an invited speaker. So you would think that all of these identities that I hold and these roles and responsibilities that I have would leave me feeling so much pride in my resilience and ability to overcome setbacks, confident in my abilities, and to feel validated by my achievements. But not surprisingly, once we find out about imposter syndrome, actually what ends up happening is often I minimize my resilience. I question my abilities and my success. I doubt my abilities and whether or not I actually belong. So the truth of the matter is I do have imposter syndrome, or imposter phenomenon as I call it. And it doesn't matter what you call it, really. It goes by many names. I call it imposter phenomenon because it is so common and it's so prevalent that is it really a syndrome? And so I tend to call it imposter phenomenon. So you'll hear me use that term throughout this presentation. And I think it's important to talk about this because we have to acknowledge that it's real, and it's painful, but it's not reflective of our true selves. It's influenced so much by external drivers, our culture and society. And the solutions, if you will, require much broader change than just changing ourselves. And I think it's really important that we connect over these discussions. And there's so much power of sharing vulnerability and our connection is how we foster authenticity and true well-being. So this is one platform to do it, but I definitely encourage you all to continue to have these conversations in your own circles, because there's only so much that we can do in one talk, right? So who has imposter syndrome? Well, pretty much everybody. All the smart, successful people that you think have it together probably have imposter syndrome. And we often tend to think, especially in academia and with high achievers, as you all are, that we're the oddball out. As individuals, we tend to be our worst critics, right? And we figure everyone else must know more than me. And I wonder how familiar that sounds to you. I know I certainly feel that way often. And the truth of the matter is that everyone's walking around feeling about the same thing. It's such a universal experience. So again, should we be calling this very universal experience, or at least universal amongst a particular population, a syndrome, rather than maybe a phenomenon, which is experienced by many? And it's so common that it's been talked about by our most famous geniuses and legends in history and today. And Albert Einstein famously talked about feeling like this involuntary swindler. And even our great Maya Angelou, I was surprised to find out, struggled possibly with imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, wondering if she was running a game on everyone and when they were going to find out about her. And other famous actors and celebrities, and even Michelle Obama has talked about struggling with imposter syndrome. And what it feels like is, when is my time going to run out? Any minute now, the clock is going to strike midnight and they're going to find out the truth about me and that I'm not who they think I am. And maybe what everyone thinks I am on the outside is this glittering, in this image, we're seeing this glittering ball gown is what people think of me. But at some point they're gonna find me out and my clock's gonna strike midnight and my time is up and the gig is up. So some of the things that tend to resonate with people if they're wondering if or not they have imposter syndrome are some of these things developed by Dr. Valerie Young, who's a leading expert in imposter syndrome. And you may want to ask yourself the question, do you worry that others will find out that you're not as bright and capable as they think you are? Do you sometimes shy away from new challenges due to self-doubt? Do you get anxious from success or praise, feeling the need to then live up to these expectations and that you will let people down? And then when you do succeed, do you think, I fooled them this time, but maybe I won't next time? And then do you feel self-shame by your success? Do you chalk up your accomplishments to being a fluke or maybe not as special as others? Do you believe others are smarter and more capable than you? And do you live in fear of being found out or unmasked? And I can tell you every single one of these statements resonates with me. And I don't know if they resonate with you, but if they do, this might be an indication that you are going through the same type of phenomenon. And honestly, imposter syndrome runs so deep, it almost is like an inception of itself. I have struggled with this same thing. I have heard other people say the same thing. Am I an imposter at having an imposter syndrome? Like maybe I'm the one who really is the real imposter. We wonder with dread, maybe we are the ones. Maybe we're so jaded about ourselves that perhaps we actually are the real imposter. And I think that that's very common, to actually question this syndrome in yourself. So who knows what this feels like, right? And typically, if we were in an audience, we could easily have you raise your hands. I'm going to attempt to try to run my first poll now by stopping the screen share and share something else here. Okay. Are you seeing my poll?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, perfect. So if you have a smartphone, you can either just show your camera at the QR code there, and it should take you, it should pop up a window for you to go to the poll, and you can enter in your answers, or you can also just text that number. So we'll give it about a minute and we'll see what kind of answers come up. And this is anonymous, so I don't know who is typing this. So it's a little bit different than a traditional chat. All the time. Sometimes, absolutely. Hell yes. Not as much as I used to. Less as I get older. Okay. I'm seeing a predominance of yeses, yeps, and many people who at least have experienced it at times. We have someone who says rarely, especially around new experiences. I don't feel I've earned the title of expert. Yeah. Getting better. But yes, definitely. I definitely feel like I'm the real imposter. This is so interesting because all of you sit, in higher education and have achieved and come to this point with so much success, yet we see how prevalent it is. And it's really eye-opening to see how many around you, left and right, you may not know, but are experiencing the same things that you are. Does it ever go away? We'll talk about that. Okay. I'm going to see if I can go back to my screen now. Okay. I'm going to assume that we're back on the PowerPoint, unless I hear otherwise. Okay. So one of the themes that comes up is feeling like an imposter about having imposter syndrome. And here's the thing that I want you to know. True imposters do not experience imposter phenomenon. And I'm going to say it again. True or real imposters do not experience imposter phenomenon. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, but this is a very interesting phenomenon, which was explained by the scientist Dunning and Kruger. And it's a type of cognitive bias. And it's the belief that that there are some people who actually feel they are smarter and more capable than they objectively are. And people who lack competence in a particular area have been shown to be unable to accurately assess their true abilities and recognize the quality of their performance. And they often overestimate their ability and their skill, and they may even be incapable of seeing the poorness of their performance. And interestingly, Dunning and Kruger found out that those who are at the high end of competence tend to actually hold either more realistic views of their knowledge and capabilities, or even tended to downplay their knowledge and capabilities. So what does that sound like, right? That sounds like imposter syndrome. And Dunning-Kruger is basically the direct opposite of imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. And I'm personally interested to see if there's a correlation between Dunning-Kruger and certain personality disorders. But that's probably a talk for another day. But the point of this is that true imposters, people who really, really may not be able to have insight into their performance, typically don't experience the sensations of imposter phenomenon or the phrases that I just showed for you. So when did we start talking about imposter syndrome? Well, there was a few brilliant psychologists, Dr. Imes and Dr. Clance, who came up with this concept. And originally when they spoke about imposter syndrome, they talked about it as being this internal experience of phoniness that appeared to be particularly prevalent in a sample of high achieving women. And since then, we've shown that imposter syndrome can also affect men as well as women. And originally in the studies, there was only a few demographics represented. They didn't have a lot of demographics as far as race goes, and as far as gender variability, and as far as other types of marginalized status goes. But we've certainly since then extrapolated this to be applicable to several other types of demographics and social identities. Generally speaking, though, it tends to occur more commonly in high achieving individuals. And despite objective successes and despite objective results, people who suffer from imposter phenomenon tend to fail to internalize these successes. And they often attribute their achievement to luck and other external factors. They persistently have self-doubt, and they often have a fear of being exposed as a fraud, or hence the name imposter. And perfectionism is really common in imposter phenomenon. And perfectionism can manifest in several different ways, but often when it comes to achievements, perfectionists may either procrastinate putting off an assignment, or out of fear that they won't be able to complete it to the necessary high standards they've set for themselves. Or they actually may over prepare, and they may spend too much time, or much more time than is needed on a task. And when you suffer from imposter phenomenon, what happens is, if he or she performs well under the context of procrastination, they figure, well, I got lucky this time around. That's not going to happen again. And if he or she performs well with over preparedness, they tend to feel that they only did well because they had to put an inordinate amount of work in it. And other folks who would have done well wouldn't have had to put in that much work. So no matter what, they discount their success. And even though people who have imposter phenomenon are often high achievers and get good results, they measure their competence not just by those objective results, but by an internal set of standards which are never perceived to really be met. There's many subtypes or different of what we call in medicine phenotypes of imposter syndrome, where it can show up in different ways. They talk about the perfectionist, or the natural genius, the superwoman, the expert, and the soloist. And the truth of the matter is, most people who identify with imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome identify with several of these, or probably all of these. In any given setting, one or another may predominate. So it's just something that's good to know about. But to me, every single one of these kind of speaks to me as far as thoughts that I've had in my own mind. And there are formal measurement scales where you can actually measure this. Honestly, I think that, as with many scales, we tend to use them in research studies. Most of us don't need a formal scale to tell us whether or not we have imposter phenomenon. Because feeling like an imposter means some very common things. You tend to attribute your accomplishments and success to luck, or the doing of others, not your own. And then you fear that you will be found out and exposed as a fraud. So you have this feeling of fakeness or phoniness that occurs despite having all the external evidence of success and positive feedback. And again, it's much more prevalent in high achievers. Also in women, as some studies show, that it might be more predominant in women as well as in minority groups. And interestingly, it tends to worsen as career trajectory progresses. I know that somebody mentioned that they felt like it got better as they got older. And I think we have yet to really study the true trajectory of imposter phenomenon. And I think there are so many variables with individuals to really know if we can make generalizations. But one of the things that has been seen is, as more responsibilities and roles come on in a person's professional life, imposter phenomenon can actually worsen. And it's often been known to flare with new challenges or times of transition, such as grad school. And there's a common narrative. There are some common themes that we see in people who have imposter phenomenon. For one, upbringing. People who have imposter phenomenon tend to have had an upbringing where they either received mixed messages, or they had much emphasis on both ends of the spectrum of either high praise or criticism. And this emphasis on achievement ends up causing this need for constant approval and validation. And that can be really hard because you're looking for external sources of validation. And so this is common, particularly when we see it in certain cultures, showing up with imposter phenomenon. Another thing that can commonly be a common narrative in imposter phenomenon is the toxic culture that people are exposed to. We have here in America a white male-dominated workplace culture. And often this shows up as the term boys club. And this is a culture where women and people of color are either not listened to, or are constantly questioned, doubted, are made to prove themselves, only to be questioned again and again, or told by words or actions that they don't fit in. that they don't belong, and then they bear the onus to change and to be accepted and validated. You know, you hear a lot about, women often hear a lot about the things that they need to do to fit in and work, such as, you know, talk a certain way or write their emails a certain way, or even adopt certain poses, the power pose or the superwoman pose, to really exert authority. We also see the effect of the grind culture, as I call it, the grind culture of success and stress and the pressure to achieve, where we praise things like, I haven't taken a sick day in 3 years, or I only took 4 weeks from maternity leave. You know, we often select out for what I call toxic perfectionism, where, you know, many of our fields, in fact, require this perfectionism and then further hone it even more. And that we praise things like not complaining, someone who doesn't complain, someone who never, you know, causes any problems, someone who pushes through. And then we call it resilience or grit. And what happens is we take the people who are having very real experiences of struggle, pain, challenge. They feel like the outsider. They feel like their vulnerability will be seen as a weakness, and they aren't allowed to be authentic with their struggles. My friend, Dr. Kimia Saraf, who's an internal medicine physician and a trauma-informed care expert, talks about this as weaponizing resilience, and how we tend to weaponize people's ability to be resilient. You know, we are a resilient people, and folks in academia are very resilient people, but we all get to places where we've either hit our breaking point or we've experienced struggle, and we need to be able to work through that. But our culture of hiding our vulnerabilities and this toxic perfectionism can really weaponize our resilience. Then we have comparison magnifiers. Social media is the perfect example, where we often are seeing the clean, not the messy. We're seeing people at their best. We're seeing filtered images of life. We're seeing people's accomplishments and achievements, which are great and we can learn from them. But we often don't see everything else that happens behind the scenes. You know, we don't see the messy house at home, or we don't see the struggles that people are having in their professional or private lives. And often there's this lack of transparency about our professional journeys and our experiences of failure. We don't talk about that publicly. You know, you just see all the accomplishments, and you see someone writing a grant or getting a research proposal put through, but you may not see all of the people that worked so hard to get that possible. And then you may wonder on your end, how is that person doing all of that? You know, I can't do all of that. You may not have the team or the resources given to you to be able to do all of those things. And we're not shown those things. And I feel strongly that this really affects our sense of identity and self-worth. And then, of course, there are very significant effects from structural inequity and implicit and explicit bias. And I'll get into that in just a bit. So why are we even talking about imposter phenomenon if it's just something that many of us experience? Well, it's because there are very real negative consequences to it. First and foremost, often selecting out for perfectionists and what we talked about with overwork, whether you procrastinate and then you overwork, or you are putting in an inordinate amount of work from the beginning. Often what happens is, because of imposter phenomenon, there's this need to prove yourself. And this causes overwork on tasks and goals. And this can lead to just sheer physical exhaustion. And then there can be mental and psychological effects. People often have so much self-doubt and worry and anxiety, a sense of shame that they're even feeling these feelings. You can feel like you don't belong, and that you're an outsider, and that you don't have the ability to be authentically you. And all of this can really affect a person's psyche and their mood, and cause real mood disturbances. And at its extreme end, we can see mood disturbances causing burnout and even suicide in some cases. And then there are effects on job satisfaction and the ability of people who are going through imposter phenomenon to pursue opportunities. And at its worst, it causes problems with retention. And we see the effects of what we commonly think of as the leaky pipeline. And it's not enough that this is happening to some individuals, but we can even see the intersection of identities causing cumulative harm. So I call imposter phenomenon a thief. It robs us of so much that is critical to our well-being. You know, when we talk about the leaky pipeline, we often talk about how there's enough water coming into the system, but what's happening once we get into the system? You know, women are entering STEM fields and higher education at parity, or in some cases even greater than parity, as compared to men. But once they enter the pipeline, what happens can be a very different story. You know, women are less likely to get certain positions within academia. They are less likely to get exceptional letters of recommendation. They're less likely to receive grant funding. They're less likely to get awards and honors. Sometimes they're less likely to get first authorships. They're less likely to be on editorial boards. They're less likely to get promotion and tenure. And depending on your field, there is, you know, in most fields, some degree of this leaky pipeline that's manifested. And in fact, I really don't like the term leaky pipeline. You know, for me, I think of this pipe as a more turbulent pipeline. There's turbulent forces in here that are forcing people out, as opposed to just this passive concept of people just falling out, right? I don't think it's that at all. I think that people are forced out because of a lot of the things that we talked about. And intersectionality matters. Intersectionality refers to the interconnected nature of social identities and the fact that you're not just one identity, but you're often multiple identities. And those multiple identities, such as gender, race, class, sexual orientation, they can combine to form cumulative systems of disadvantage. So the effects that we see for health outcomes are much worse often for Black women, because they're not just Black and they're not just women, but it's the sum, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So them being Black women matters much more significantly in their health outcomes than either identity alone. And we can see intersectionality in academia, where as we get through the promotion and tenure track, we are seeing a less and less representation of women of color, particularly Black women, at the highest levels of promotion. So we've got to talk about this othering, these experiences of not being in the majority group and what that does to folks. You know, we know it's not a stretch to say that not being in the majority group can give you a sense of not belonging. But beyond that, being in a minority group, you can often be on the receiving end of explicit overt bias, unconscious or implicit bias, and microaggressions. And all of these things can lead to, beyond a sense of not belonging, actual, real, harmful effects of othering and discrimination. You know, some ways that this shows up is, you know, not getting hired for the position, not being recommended for the promotion, not getting the pay parity, not getting, in medical school, we see awards and honors preferentially going to our white medical students, such as our Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Society, which traditionally has not been extended to equivalent degrees to our Black and Hispanic medical students. We see comments of microaggression like, wow, how did you get into that school? Or I wouldn't have expected you to go to medical school or grad school. You know, these comments really lead to a sense of not only not belonging, but a feeling that your merits are not your own. And these feelings of isolation, inadequacy, in combination with these real experiences of discrimination, lead to folks feeling the constant need to prove their worth, prove their skill, prove their merit, prove their right to belong. They constantly feel the need to seek frequent approval and validation because they're not only not getting it, but they're actually getting the opposite of validation. They're getting invalidated. And then ultimately, they feel the pressure and need to change their natural behavior to fit in. You know, you should wear your hair a certain way, you should dress a certain way, you should speak a certain way. And all of this causes such mental fatigue and leads to exhaustion. And we wonder why we have the rates of burnout that we do. You know, isolation and in combination with the experience of discrimination, along with the double standard that women and people of color face, can lead to decreased confidence and decreased pursuit of opportunities. If you're not confident, are you going to really go for that promotion? Are you going to really go for that opportunity or that speaking opportunity? Are you going to really, you know, go for the things that you want to do to progress your career? You know, potentially not. And this is how we see the effects of imposter phenomenon actually perpetuating inequity. And I think it's really a vicious cycle. You know, a wonderful article was written by Dr. Mulangi and Dr. Jugsy about imposter syndrome not being really the cause of things, but a symptom. And inequity really is a disease. And of course, there are other things outside of inequity, but I think structural inequity and bias are a huge proponent to imposter phenomenon. And we know that structural inequity and bias affects career growth and opportunities and pay. And we've seen how all of these can affect people's sense of self-worth and identity and cause imposter phenomenon. And then now we've talked about how that can further affect career growth and opportunities and pay. So what happens? We continue to not only maintain inequity, but we magnify inequity. Representation matters. We've heard this over and over again. You know, these are comments, the first two are comments I've had from students. We can't be what we can't see. And we've heard that comment over and over again. And this is so true. And I have two little girls who, when they see people who look like them on TV, they make comments at a young age of, oh, mom, could I be that? Absolutely, you can be that. But they can say that because they can see it now. You know, and another student told me, if there were more people like me in leadership, I might be able to more accurately perceive myself and not focus on the shortcomings I perceive. So we can see how being able to see yourself or people like you in positions of authority and leadership really makes a big difference in how you view yourself. So we have to shift the narrative of imposter syndrome from why do I have this to what is causing me to experience this. And like I say about a lot of things, stop trying to fix us, fix the system. Our solutions have to be beyond individual and intrapersonal and interpersonal solutions. They have to also look at the structures and the systems within which we work and live. So time for the next poll. Let me try this again. Okay. Are you seeing my poll?
I still see the PowerPoint.
Okay, let's try this again then. How about now?
Yes, we see
Oh,
it.
perfect. And again, I've allowed you to answer multiple times, so feel free to put in as many answers as you wish. And this is a very open-ended question on purpose. How does imposter syndrome affect you? How does it show up in you? What do you feel with it? Anything that comes to your mind, you know, please put into the answer. And yeah, you can just scan the QR code and start typing. Wasted energy, self-doubt, fear of self-fulfilling prophecy, not participating as much as others, feeling inadequate, checking multiple times before I send anything, keeps me distant, wow, hold me back, always apologizing, makes me shy from speaking up. I feel tired all the time. Working more hours in order to feel like I'm meeting the bare minimum. Hold back on challenges. Constant stress. Scared of failure. Yeah. You can see here how many of these experiences are even so hard to read. You know, thinking about the people sitting next to you, walking around in their days, in their work lives, in their home lives, feeling these things. Influence me to settle for less. Someone talked about the boys club. Feeling constantly under a microscope. Yeah. Makes me feel discouraged about my progress in my graduate program, like I will never graduate. I don't trust people. I want to thank you all for sharing these things. These are all very, very vulnerable and very private shares. And I know, having this be anonymous, I think really helps with that. But it's still hard to type these words. Self-care feels like a luxury. Yeah. Not respected. Okay, I am going to stop share. Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing those very private and vulnerable emotions. And whew, I think we need to take a breath. Reading those for me was so much of what I read resonates with me, things that I have felt and feel not only occasionally, but feel often. And we have to work and study and learn and go home and then come back and do it all over again in the context of feeling those things, of feeling tired all the time, feeling scared, feeling like a failure, feeling muscle tension, feeling unrespected, not trusting people. When I think about the potential of our society, and I read things like that, it's so easy to see the connection between how people are feeling and how much we are robbed of our ability to really have full potential of ourselves and do more good. So what do we do about all of this? I firmly believe that imposter phenomenon has to be a conversation that goes outside of what we do with ourselves, because we're often tasked with the onus of changing ourselves when so much of the problem source, as we've talked about, comes from outside of ourselves. But that being said, there are some things that we can do. And much of this is interactive that we do with each other. But there are things we can do to, I don't want to call it solve it, because I don't know about solving it. I don't know if there'll ever be a time where I won't have imposter phenomenon. I wish I could answer that question in the positive. I don't know. If I get there, I'll tell you. But I do think there are things we can do to empower ourselves. And number one, that's breaking our silence, talking about it and normalizing the fact that these things are not okay, but we feel them and that we're not alone. And connection over our shared experiences can be so powerful in breaking some of that isolation that adds to the difficulty of what we're actually going through. And this is tied hand in hand with awareness and just having more formal education on it and having institutions, organizations like Chet put on these talks where we talk about not just the science or the data of the conditions that we're working on or the things that we're learning about in school, but the things that permeate all of those environments, like implicit bias or imposter phenomenon. We have to be able to come to terms with the fact that perfectionism is impossible and no one is perfect and perfect isn't the goal. I've got to admit to you, this one is hard because I can admit to you that I believe perfectionism is impossible. But when people around me or society in general really hones out for perfectionism, it makes it really hard to take this one all the way through. That being said, I do try to remind myself that perfect isn't the goal. We have to be able to talk to our mentors. And by mentors, I don't just mean people who are older than you. People who are younger than you can be a mentor. People of all ages and stages can be our mentors and can teach us things and guide us. And whoever that is for you, and hopefully you have more than one. I don't think there's ever a limit on who can be a mentor. But talking to others about it helps to normalize it. People who've been there, who've maybe traversed your path, helps to normalize it and validate your experiences. And they also help to see you for who you really are. You know, my sister is often my mentor, because she helps me see me for who I really am. And, you know, there's other people who aren't in my professional life who help to see me for who I really am. And I go to those people when I really need it. Our mentors can also help us separate feelings from facts. They help us recognize our actual expertise, and they help us realize our objective successes and our strengths and what we do well. And we have to acknowledge that getting help and resources are the keys to success. You know, even for this talk, I have notes in front of me. You know, I'm not just doing this all off the cuff. And I think it's important that we share what's behind the scenes, and because we don't always see that. And knowing that it's okay to have those things that you rely upon to help you. That's how we get work done, is we get help and we get resources. And being honest about that and being patient with yourself about needing that help and resources is really key. People often do this when they make gratitude journals, which, you know, where they document and celebrate their wins. And I think it's a great practice. It can be hard to keep up with, but I think it really is a good practice to be able to keep track of all those little wins, the little things that happen throughout your day that help to put things in perspective. That when things seem like you feel like you're failing or you're not getting anything right, there may actually be things that you're getting along the way, that you would count as a win. So listing those out, listing out your strengths, and ask other people about it. Ask other people to, you know, it seems weird because we're in this culture of like, we should be humble, right? But humility doesn't mean that you shouldn't celebrate yourself. And I think there's a real difference between, you know, being humble, but yet celebrating yourself, versus actually being an overt narcissist. So it's okay to ask for input, and it's okay to celebrate yourself. I think it's really healthy. And that in turn can help us challenge our own negative thoughts and maybe start developing a new script in our mind, because our internal scripts are very well rehearsed. I know my script down pat, and what I'm going to tell myself when I feel like something didn't go well. I know it so well. And so I do think that there are ways that we can rewrite it, but it's hard. We have to be intentional about it. And then we can and we must recontextualize failure. Now, failure is universal and it's necessary for growth and success. It can feel so isolating, it hurts, and our fear of failure is such a powerful limiter of our potential. But we know it's universal. We know that we have this as a shared experience, and we need to share those failures more often. I recently put a thread out on Twitter, prior to the match, talked about the failures I experienced and how I didn't match in dermatology. And I think it's really important to share with medical students who are on the precipice of this big task, where they consider themselves, you know, either succeeding or failing, to know that it's not this binary journey. It's the whole, you know, our whole professional life is sort of this road to success. And our failures or setbacks give us knowledge that's so helpful for our growth, and they can empower us to do more. I'm starting to recontextualize failure for myself as success in progress. No, we fail over and over and over again in order to get to what we would traditionally call a success. But what if we recontextualize it in that it's all just part of the journey, and that what we traditionally call failure can be such a gift? It can be a gift for ourselves in that it can help us grow, learn from things, and do things differently. It can sometimes open up new opportunities. You know, folks that don't match, I'll use this example again, have to end up taking a research fellowship often. And often that research fellowship can empower them and enrich their career in ways that they never would have planned for if they had matched. And so future opportunities can open up, due to this redirection that failure often gives us. And, you know, it gives us an edge that we may not have had otherwise. And this is a gift that can keep on giving. And I say this because we can amplify the effect of it by sharing our journey with others. And sharing it helps not only to normalize it for the other person, but it helps to normalize it for you as well. And you've all seen this graph, I think, this diagram before. It's from Dimitri Martin's This Is a Book. And it's just a perfect and very simple, diagram of what success really looks like, in that it's this twisty, turvy, windy path, and every one of those twists and turns can be really powerful, and it's all part of the journey. And I can't stress enough the critical role of mentors and what a gift they can be to us. You know, they help us to normalize our failures, and they can decrease our sense of isolation. Like I said, they can help us recognize our strengths and our positive attributes. They can give us very constructive feedback and give us opportunities for growth. And they can help us utilize our strong suits in ways that can really empower us. And then, of course, they can sponsor us for actual opportunities. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the fact that this goes beyond ourselves. This is beyond intrapersonal solutions, but this really also needs to encapsulate the system or structural solutions. You know, we need to go beyond topics of just diversity, inclusion, and equity. Many institutions now, offices, organizations have equity, diversity, inclusion offices or officers, you know, and they're doing good work. But this is beyond just adding numbers into the pipeline or having check boxes on implicit bias training, right? This goes much beyond that. And this, we need to get to a place where we're really getting intimate knowledge of the well-being status of learners, of employees, of faculty, of staff, and really getting at the heart of finding out what are these experiences of exclusion within educational and workplace systems that are affecting people. We have to engage leadership to invest in transforming the culture and really getting real policy change. You know, there is harm that comes from bias and microaggressions daily. And often this comes from our leaders. And how often do they hear about it? How often do our leaders and the people who are, you know, who have authority over us actually hear about some of this harm and bias? You know, and this was really going to inform our EDI work, our equity, diversity, and inclusion work. Is we have to be able to hear the things that are really uncomfortable and hard to hear. You know, we have to address racist policies. We have to look at our metrics. And of course, this isn't to talk on equity per se, but having inequitable metrics like being underrepresented in your field, of course, is going to influence your sense of self-worth in that field. And your personal experiences can be very tied in to the objective metrics around you. And at the end of the day, our leaders and all of us really need to ask, are we thriving or are we just surviving? Are we just trying to keep our head above water and get to the next day? And I don't think a society that is ever going to really make meaningful, true change and progress is going to do it if folks are just surviving. Just as we allocate resources towards quality improvement or towards so many of the other things that our institutions often allocate resources to, we need to allocate actual dollars and cents and expert resources towards amplifying, paying, promoting folks, and preserving well-being for traditionally excluded groups. And this well-being goes beyond the mindfulness lecture or the talk on yoga or the retreat. This goes towards this has to do with asking those really tough questions and being prepared to hear things that not only make you uncomfortable, but that you may not have the answers for. And this should all be expertly trained and resourced for. And once you look at this, it's not a matter of we look at this one time and then we move on. You know, we've got to keep reevaluating because this is not a one-time goal. So, with that, I want to just thank you so much for your attention. You guys, you learners are our future, and I am so inspired by what our learners have had to go through, what our students have had to go through this year with the pandemic and having to have everything upended, an upheaval of curriculum delivery and of course the background of the pandemic the whole time, and then all of the things that were happening nationally. It's a lot to bear, and the fact that you've made it through your schooling and that you're showing up every day is such a testament to your strength, to your resilience, to your ability to persevere, and to your potential. And I want you to know that. I really, really do. And I think this quote by Toni Morrison really says it best. You are your best thing. We have everything we need to really succeed and to feel good, but it's got to go beyond ourselves. So with that, I thank you so much. Here's my contact information, and let me stop sharing.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much, Dr. Bowers. So we are close to 1 o'clock. But if you have questions, I have some collected questions that people sent over to me. But I'll give participants a chance to submit them over the chat box. Dr. Bowers does have a few minutes where we can go over 1 o'clock, but before we reach 1 o'clock and some folks get off, I just want to say thank you so much for attending, and keep in touch with Chat over our newsletter. I might have someone on the team post the newsletter link in the chat box. But if you have questions, like I said, Dr. Bowers has a few minutes to go over 1 o'clock if you are available. One of the questions I saw that I thought is interesting is, what can other people do to minimize or eliminate imposter syndrome for BIPOC folks in their field?
Thanks for that question. So I want to just read it back. What can other people do to minimize imposter syndrome for BIPOC folks? Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's really the heart of it all is, people, in our respective circles, whether we're in academia or we're in a work environment, or both often. We are kind of in this flux period where we recognize, or at least some of us recognize, the need for increased representation, but we haven't yet got to the place with what do we do after that? What do we do after we bring in people who are underrepresented? Because the mere fact that they're underrepresented is automatically going to bring with it a fact that there's going to be a sense of not belonging because they're underrepresented. So I don't think we're asking those questions enough, is once we bring people in, what are we doing then to really foster well-being and inclusion? So, we often talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, but are we really talking about the inclusion part? And not just, I'm going to give you a leadership role, because that's often what it ends up being, is that, you're Black, or you're Latinx, or you're Indian, you're woman. So I think you should have this leadership role. But are we really fostering people to thrive in those roles? And I think we have to do that. We have to ask people, what do you want to do? How can I support your efforts? And not just assume that because you're BIPOC, that you want to work in equity and social determinants of health and topics of structural racism. You may be interested in all those topics, but you may also be very much be interested in in genetics, or in the basic science of your field. So not assuming that people who are BIPOC are just going to work on all those problems that you need to solve, and really making sure that when you do look at structural racism or implicit bias, that you're being informed by people who lived it. You're asking them about their experiences, but you're not putting upon them the work of doing it. And I think that's a tough balance sometimes to maintain, but I think it's really important.
Thank you so much. Is anyone that is on the Zoom webinar, does anyone want to ask a question now and unmute themselves? I have another question here that was sent to me. Do countries with more expansive social safety nets have less prevalence of imposter syndrome because everyone can risk failure without risking life and limb?
Wow, that is a great question. I have to admit my lack of ability to answer this question with full data. I don't know. I don't know the prevalence of how imposter syndrome varies in other countries, but I will say that much of the literature is here within the United States, and I don't know if that's reflective of anything in that regard. In the United States, we do enjoy a very diverse population. We enjoy the heterogeneity of diversity, much more so than in a lot of other countries. And that's of course our greatest strength, and a beautiful part of the fabric of this country. That's what makes this country what it is. But I also think because of that heterogeneity and the fact that there's still a dominant population that which that heterogeneity is operating in, we do get a lot of these dynamics that we may or may not see played out maybe in the same ways in other countries. And I don't want to say that it's not played out, because there's other forms of oppression or stratification in other countries that is prevalent. But I do think that that is something unique to the United States. That's both the most beautiful part of us, but then also things that we haven't reckoned yet. And how are we going to approach that? How are we going to approach the fact that we have multiple races represented, multiple types of different identities, and yet making it, people feel included and whole and with optimal well-being.
I see Mark has their hand raised. Mark, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. And Dr. Bowers, thank you. This presentation is amazing. One, I just appreciate a presentation where you're not reading from the slides and you're just influencing it with your research, your knowledge. It's just really conversational. So thank you so much for your time. Part of my role, I work here at Northwestern in advising graduate students. And it is interesting. I appreciate your comments that there is that individual connection point, but also looking at systemic issues and equity. I'm just wondering, though, in terms of conversations, different people have different experiences and what they feel comfortable sharing. And it's not something where I could come out with my advisees and just say, so Susan, are you experiencing imposter syndrome here at Northwestern? That I just don't think that would work, obviously. But are there questions or ways to open those conversations to create safe spaces? Because I think for me as a 56-year-old gay white man, I'm aware of the intersectionality, and certainly don't want to have all the support being put upon colleagues who are people of color, but also recognizing that my experience is different than someone else's experience. So I guess I'm just trying to ask questions or ways to have that conversation, or to reinforce that we all experience it, although differently because of intersectionality, and just to make it safe to have that conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That is such a good question. I have a couple of thoughts. Number one, I struggle with this myself, because I am someone who's entered this, the equity space, in more recent career. And certainly it's not something I was trained in medical school or residency. And there are people who train within these topics, train within equity or social justice or crucial conversations or trauma-informed care. And then the majority of us are out, learning and working as we're doing it. And I often, struggle with, am I the best person to know how to facilitate these very hard conversations? Am I well equipped? Am I trained to do that? Because there is trauma that comes out of these conversations. And it's one thing to know about a topic and to have interest in it and to be learning about a topic. And I consider myself a scholar, not an expert by any means. But I do think we have to acknowledge where our limits are, and when we can do it, bring in the people that really are the experts in facilitating these conversations, if you have access to them. And we're realizing this at our medical school. A lot of things that we did here at SIU were a smaller school and a smaller community. Multiple people were just trying to do these different responsibilities on their own, until we started realizing how that was failing us. And the fact that we really needed someone who's trauma-informed care specialist to help facilitate these conversations, someone who's actually an expert in race-based conversations and dealing with structural racism and social justice and white supremacy. We needed these people to help us facilitate these conversations. It's not to say that we can't learn. And I really hope, I don't necessarily think that, I don't know if I, need to go and get, a master's in this subject. Often that's what happens, is people with imposter phenomenon feel like they need to master, get another certificate to be able to approach a subject. But I do think we can learn from our experts. I do think we have to be multidisciplinary in these conversations and not just feel like, oh, I'm the chair, or I'm the chief, or I'm the leader, so I have the role, so I need to also do this, or I need to just stay within my physician circles. I really think we do a big disservice when we're not multidisciplinary in our approach. So talking to teachers, talking to folks who work with these topics in corporate culture, they can teach us a lot. So that's one part of it. But the flip side is I also think we have to get a little bit more comfortable with sometimes not knowing what to say, and just creating a space where we start to dip our toe in with being able to listen to people. And it's not going to happen overnight. If I hold a meeting or hold a session with my residents out of the blue and say, hey, I want to talk about what's bugging you guys. If I haven't set up that culture in advance, I'm going to get a lot of crickets. And it's happened before where early on in my program directorship, I would just, be like, hey, let's talk about what's bothering you guys. What's on your mind? Nothing, silence. But then when it came time to evaluations, I would get a lot of feedback. So why can, people tell me anonymously, but they didn't feel like they could say it in person. And so I had to really look at that and see, have I set up the culture to where people feel like they can start talking about these things? And that doesn't happen quickly. I mean, that I think takes time to start to open up those conversations. So even if we don't have the experts at our disposal, and even if we don't have that multidisciplinary team, I still think that we can start to really talk about these subjects in a manner that's comfortable for our, for our level, and start to, be honest about the fact that I don't know everything about this, but I want to listen. I want to hear what you have to say. And you might get 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, 4 meetings with people not saying anything. But at some point, you leave that, you create that space for them. People are going to start talking up and opening up more.
Thank you for such a nuanced answer.
I appreciate all these questions so much. This is great. I know sometimes it's hard to ask questions, but please don't hesitate.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So as someone who struggles with imposter syndrome, how can we raise our children not to have it?
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Thank you for asking that. Okay, I have 2 daughters, a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I am trying to be very mindful of this. And I talk with my sister about it too, because she has 2 daughters as well. And, I think one of the things, I'll just tell you what I've done. I with my children, my daughters particularly, recognizing that they are daughters and they are female, and that they're going to be, imbibed with these messages as well, is really being proactive about talking about vulnerability. I think that's a big thing, because I can already see in my own children, the tendency to want to be perfectionistic and, beat themselves up for one mistake, or, worry about what other people are going to think. And I think there's ways that we can talk about these things without, sort of being like academic about it with kids, where we talk about like the actual term imposter phenomenon, but we talk about being able to talk about being scared, being able to talk about, I don't know how to do this, being able to ask for help, being able to, talk about when they feel like they made a mistake, being able to frame failure, something that they didn't do well, into an opportunity to try something new. And I think those things, which are just good for child rearing in general, they're good for all of us, I think are very manageable ways to sort of kind of infuse them with this sense of confidence, this true confidence that, it doesn't come from external validation. And I have to watch my own messages. When I talk to my own girls, I really I'm trying to watch myself say, great, to praise them, and watch how I'm phrasing my praise. In that, it's not so much about the end product, but it's about, what you did really well with that. If I can tell a little story, my daughter has to give a presentation on Brazil, and she's making these note cards, and one of her note cards was language. and she looked up a couple of things about the Brazilian language, and she had 2 or 3 lines, I want to say, and she didn't have enough for her note card. And she's like, Mom, I need more for my note card. What else can I put on my note card? And I said, well, I mean, how about you look up some words, you know, like, and actually write some words down and what they mean. And she's like, well, can you help me with it? And I said, and I was actually, you know, finalizing this presentation. I said, I actually can't. I have some work to do, but, you know, just go for it. You know, look things up and tell me, you know, then we'll talk about it. And it was amazing. You know, I didn't really watch what she was doing, but a half an hour later, she came back to me and she had written 10 words. She had gone to YouTube. She had typed in, as I asked her how she did all this, she typed in words, Brazil, easy, some combination of easy words for Brazil. And then she found YouTube videos and she watched the videos. And this is my daughter who's very afraid of failure, very afraid of failure. And afterwards, she read to me her words. And I, instead of talking about instead of focusing on her end product, what I talked a lot about, as I said, that's awesome. That's wonderful. Those sound like great words, and you're going to have a lot to talk about on your card. But what I also praised her about was the fact that she did this, that she didn't know what to do, and that she looked this up, and the biggest smile came on her face. And she's not that, that tends to be really hard on herself, but for her to smile about that really meant a lot. And I noticed that came when I praised her for the process of how she did it. So I know there's a long answer, but I think we can talk about this with our kids in ways that really build them up inside for who they are, and that'll help serve them well as they go through their journey. Hopefully this won't be a thing in 20 years, you know, that would be great.
Hi, Satritha, it's Samantha. I'd like to chime into that response too, because I have a 7-month-old, so you can probably hear her right now. And so I've looked into stuff like this pretty recently because I'm, trying to figure out how to raise my own baby. And I think one thing I heard about, which I just feel like I didn't even think about it until hearing it, but just emphasizing to your children that you love them unconditionally. And so they don't feel that their worth is based on if they're good or bad, because that can also help in terms of abuse prevention. Like if they've experienced anything inappropriate, then they're more likely to tell you and not feel ashamed to tell you or like it was their fault. If you make it clear that no matter that there's nothing that they could do that would make you not love them. And so when I heard that advice, I'm like, wow, that's so powerful. And I think that we as parents often don't realize how often we say things like, oh, you're a good girl, or you did something bad. And it's like that language is so powerful for children. We don't even realize how it shapes them.
Thank you so much for saying that, Samantha. That is absolutely true. I've had conversations like that, with my husband about that. And it gets at when we talked about upbringing and mixed messages that come from parents, and this sense of praise or criticism. And then not only that, but how is that praise and criticism tied to their identity? So it's beyond, a homework project or something, but it really gets at their identity is tied to that praise. And just like what you're saying is exactly that. And so thanks for saying that. I think that's very, very true. And not giving them the mixed messages that, our love is conditional upon their performance is really important. That is such a great addition. And it feels good. It feels good to be that way. A lot of these things that we talk about as parents that can help our children, it feels better to be that way. But it's hard. It's hard. When, we're so hardwired in our behaviors and how we grew up, that when we're tired and exhausted, I think it's really hard to we have to be so intentional about that. And it seems like even though it feels good, it should be so much easier. And I'm always amazed at sometimes how I have to work hard at making sure I watch my messages, because I'm frequently tired and, multitasking, which I hate, I don't like multitasking. So yeah, that's a great point though.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bowers, and thank you for everyone that participated and attended today's event. I highly encourage you to send Dr. Bowers any questions you have, and follow her on Twitter because she has a really great feed. If you're not on Twitter, yeah, go for it and follow her. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and subscribe to our newsletter to find out more about upcoming events. Again, thank you everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bowers.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, my honor.